We are live.
Good afternoon. I'm Shanika Smith, the Chair of the Equity Engagement Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to our June 18th, 2024 remote meeting. All council committee members and staff are participating virtually. To have the audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We're streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have the option for the public to listen live by phone by calling 855-925-2801 and entering meeting code 2689. For today's meeting, you also have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 2689. Your phone will be muted and you'll hear the meeting live. At this point, the speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. I'll now go through and introduce all of our committee members and staff who are participating virtually. When I call your name, give a quick hello. Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Hello.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good afternoon.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good afternoon.
Equity Inclusion Director Salah Manaya Merritt.
Good afternoon.
Director of Communication and Public Engagement Dawa Hitch.
Hello.
Dawa Hitch. I always say your name wrong. I'm sorry. All right, we'll move on to our meeting agenda. Can I get someone to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved. Second.
All right, I'll do a roll call vote for approval. Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
And myself, aye. The motion carries, and we'll move into our next agenda item. We have a standing reparations update, and Salah is going to take it from here.
Thank you and good afternoon all. My name is Salah Manaya Merritt and I will be providing a reparations update. Next slide, please. So some key takeaways. We've had 3 meetings since our last meeting, or since my last presentation. June 1st, we had a retreat. June 10th, we met virtually, and June 17th, we met in person. Our meeting agendas included the election of a new chair and vice chair, language discussion around specifying Black residents and recommendations. We had recommendation voting on June 1st and June 17th and touched on prioritization. We had a discussion around the timeline extension request. Also, final presentation and report writing discussion, community engagement, and an update on the reparations budget. Next slide, please. So our June 1st retreat, it took place, at Harris. We had a new chair and vice chair voted in. Dewana Little was voted in as the chair. Bobette Mays was voted in as the vice chair. Again, we had language discussion around Black residents. Our facilitator, Venetia Crawford, presented on the legalities of using Black in recommendations. She shared alternate language. She had met with our city attorney, Brad Branham, to come up with the alternate language. The commissioners voted to accept the language that was presented at that time. Recommendation voting, we had a total of 21 recommendations that were voted and passed on at this meeting. We also had an extension request, a conversation. There was a draft of the timeline extension that was shared with the commissioners, which they are currently working on. Next slide, please. At our June 10th virtual meeting, we discussed, we actually had a retreat debrief. So for those individuals who were not able to attend the retreat, we provided an overview of the presentation from the retreat. We also had further discussion on the extension request. The commissioners discussed and voted on the submission of an extension request to be presented to City Council, and that extension request will be added to the July 23rd City Council agenda. Next slide, please. At our June 17th meeting, again, we had voting. We voted on 9 recommendations. They were all passed. This was through for economic development and health and wellness. There was also conversation around what the final presentation would look like and the final report discussion. That discussion for the final report is that we are meeting bi-weekly. The first meeting took place on June the 10th. Our next meeting is on June the 24th. There was a community engagement update shared by the chair, and I was able to share a city update, and the county shared their budget update as well. Next slide, please. So for our next steps moving forward, the extension request will be presented again at the July 23rd City Council meeting. I probably should update this next bullet point. There was conversation around having a joint city and county work session regarding the recommendations. The date was to be determined based on the results of the extension request. There is, again, the CRC report writing. Again, we met on Monday, June the 10th. There is a total of 11 members comprised of city and county staff, IFA facilitators, and commission members. Again, we'll be meeting bi-weekly, and additional meeting dates are being considered, and we'll be discussing the timeline of what that looks like. Next slide, please. Again, our key takeaways, we had the 3 meetings this past month. Actually, this current month. We elected a new chair and a vice chair, had the discussion around Black language, had voting on the 1st and the 17th. Again, the extension request was discussed, final presentation and report writing, as well as community engagement, and the budget was shared. That completes my presentation, and I am free to answer any questions that you all may have.
No questions?
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll see you July 23rd.
Yes.
All right, next on our agenda today, we have an update from Dawa Hitch. She's going to give us an update on hybrid meetings.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Dawa Hitch, and I serve as the Communication and Public Engagement Director for the city. It's my pleasure today to share with you an update on our hybrid meeting project. And I've got Dan Ferris here, and he may be, if there are any technical questions, he's going to be happy to answer those as we move through the presentation. So really happy to have Dan here and to share this update with you all. Next slide. So we've had a number of presentations on this ARPA, this big giant ARPA, Inclusive and Accessible Government Project. And just to reiterate that the goal of this project is really aimed towards neighborhood resilience, and that is by addressing barriers to communication and engagement. So with this particular component, hybrid meetings specifically seek to improve accessibility and decision-making. And the idea is to do that by removing some barriers to participation, and some of those barriers are listed here: visual impairments, hearing impairments, language barriers, transportation barriers, family responsibility barriers, and technology barriers. And this is the first time you guys have seen this date. We are expecting this project to be complete by December 2024. Next slide. All right, so just to recap, on June 20th, 2023, sorry, that caught me. I was like, wait a minute, do we have the wrong year? No, it was about a year ago. The committee voted unanimously to move forward with 3 recommendations that staff offered related to hybrid meetings. The first being to move all boards and commissions to hybrid meetings. The second, to keep council committee meetings virtual. And then the third, to keep city council meetings in person only until all board and commission meetings are moved to the hybrid option, and then revisit city council interest in hybrid participation for public comment in city council meetings. Next slide. All right, so here are some milestones that have been met since we last presented on this. There was the Equity and Engagement Committee vote that I just referenced, and then from June of last year to February of this year, staff did a deep dive into researching the technical specifications, as well as the contracting approach for being able to deliver this project. And part of that was to do some contingency planning for maintaining our current service agreements for the equipment that's currently in the first floor conference room. So there's a lot of legwork that we had to do there. And we had a number of different departments, including our city attorney's office, kind of help us through finding out how we can most appropriately do that in the best interest of the city. So that got us, so after February, we worked on getting the RFP together. We got that posted in April, bidding closed in May. And then on June 7th, we issued a notification of intent to award to the vendor that was chosen by the selection group. And then on council's June 25th agenda, we've got on the consent agenda, the contract for city council to consider and or approve. Then we're looking at October 2024, where the city clerk's office is going to take the updated remote meeting policy to boards and commissions committee, and then city council for consideration and approval. And that's to support this new approach that we'll be taking with hybrid meetings. And it's going to boards and commissions committee because they are the ones who, back during COVID, originally were presented with that remote meeting policy. So just wanted to make sure that this committee was aware of that. And then again, we're looking at December 2024 for the room to be upgraded and for us to be able to execute this project. Execute the change is probably more appropriate. Next slide. All right, so if we're beginning with the end in mind, just to give a recap of what a hybrid meeting means, we're being driven by the belief that all people have access to decision making and feel welcome to participate. So for the board and commission hybrid meeting participants, options will include board and commission members can be in the first floor conference room and they can participate remote by Google Meet. So again, this is board and commission members. They will have those two options. Community members will have the option to participate in the first floor conference room and the opportunity to participate in public comment remote by phone via the public input platform. Next slide. So here's an overview of the board and commission member experience. So this is what it's going to look like if you're a board and commission member with this hybrid model. So board and commission members in the room will see and converse with remote board and commission members through the 86-inch televisions that are in the room. There's those 4 televisions in the room. So if you're sitting behind the dais, then you'll look up at the television in front of you and you'll see your colleagues on the commission and be able to converse with them. Remote board and commission members, so those that are at home or someplace remote, they will see and converse with the in-person board and commission members through the Google Meet. And what they'll see is a shot of the dais. So during presentations, they'll see presentations or the document camera content. So we'll be able, with this new technology, we're going to be able to switch between inputs. So they can either see the camera from the room or they can see the presentation instead of what the presentation looks like in the room, and which is impossible to read if you're participating through Google. All right, so the third, remote board and commission members will hear public commenters through the Google Meet. And what they will see is the phone icon for remote commenters. For if you guys want to think back to COVID, the little pulsing telephone icon when we've got somebody offering public comment remotely. Or they'll see a shot of the dais for in-person commenters. So again, they'll be able to experience both right there from their computer. Next slide. And here is what community members will experience. So community members in the room will see and hear the remote board commission members through the televisions. Again, they'll be, if you're in the audience, there are the televisions that are behind the dais. So it's a comfortable view and experience. community members in the room will give public comment at the lectern. That's not anything different than what we're used to. And then again, community members giving public comment remotely will be listening to the meeting by phone. And when prompted by staff to speak during public comment, they can enter into the meeting that way. Next slide. All right, so back to those key takeaways. This project is rooted in neighborhood resilience. Hybrid meetings aim to improve accessibility and decision-making. And this particular strategy of having hybrid board and commission meetings is looking to remove a number of barriers, including visual impairments, hearing impairments, language barriers, transportation barriers, family responsibility barriers, and technology barriers. And this project will be up and running with hybrid meetings in December of 2024. Next slide. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Councilmember Roney.
Big surprise, I have questions, but first, Dawa, thank you for working so hard with your team on these deliverables for this big project. The first question I had was around the contracting. Maybe you can help me remember like how many groups applied and was it awarded to an MWBE contractor? I'm just thinking about where our equity and engagement intersects with this work.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Dan, do you want to give a quick overview of that piece of it?
Sure. We ultimately ended up having 3 vendors apply for the award, and the vendor to which we've sent the intent to award is a MWB vendor. So that worked out nicely.
Excellent. And then the second question is around logistics. So I'm sure there are numerous boards and commissions or advisory boards that would benefit from having these barriers to participation addressed. And I'm wondering, are we going to provide this to all boards and commissions at the same time? Or are we going to pilot some first? I know HRCA had a long-standing request, and I spoke with members again at their last meeting that were having several barriers pop up across different needs and at different times where it seemed like there was a desire to sometimes meet in person, but if necessary, like if childcare or transportation was an issue, it was the difference in them being able to be in the room or not. So are we planning to pilot and test it out, or are we just going to roll full steam ahead every advisory board?
Thank you for that question. And we are definitely planning on rolling it out, leading with the boards and commissions that we have understood to have the greatest challenges with barriers. And I know that HRCA has definitely been identified as one that we want to lead with. So yes, that is the strategy that we're planning. We're working very closely with the city attorney's office. I do know a lot of that work had been led by our former deputy clerk, and I think she's left us in a really great place to be able to continue that work. And I know from working with the city clerk, Maggie Burleson, that there is still support and a desire to move forward in that way.
Thank you so much. Having been able to participate in hybrid meetings at the MPO level, it sounds really similar, but I know that it would probably help to give some test runs. So appreciate you.
Always.
All right, Dara, thank you.
Thank you.
On to our next agenda item, and Rachel is going to give us a run through on our committee work plan and our work plan development for 2025.
Sure. Thank you. And good afternoon again, members of the Equity and Engagement Committee. So the purpose of today's presentation is really twofold. One of the things that we don't do a lot of across the organization is taking time to talk about the progress that we have made over the course of the last year. So the first part of this presentation is really a look back at what we've done over the course of the last 12 months, thanks to your leadership. And then start the conversation as we're embarking on a new fiscal year of what we want to focus on for FY 2025. So this will be kind of a part one of FY 25 work planning, and then we'll come back in August for additional feedback and conversation. And as we're going, you can go to the next slide, Katie. As we're going through the key takeaways, before I get started on those, I do just want to also take stock that this is a new committee that's been around for 18 months now. And so really appreciate the flexibility, the leadership, and the input that's been provided by staff, as well as the 3 elected officials serving on this committee, because we've been charting new ground with this committee and kind of figuring out how best to make sure that we are focusing on equity and engagement, as well as talking about it regularly with our council members and making sure that staff is prioritizing this work because of the alignment to your strategic priorities and your vision. So just wanted to say thank you for your leadership and take stock of the fact that we have made a lot of progress while we still have a long way to go with the body of work assigned to this committee. So under key takeaways, as a quick reminder, our annual committee work plans are tools to plan for and better organize the work of the city council committees. The council committee work plans are informed by your annual strategic priorities, your goal statements, which were a new element added in fiscal year 2024, and the committee scopes of work. And those scopes of work were established back in November of 2022. And we'll go through this committee scope of work in just a little bit. The work plans include a combination of ongoing administrative items, along with policy considerations that include specific assignments for advisory boards, as well as other committees. And then your work plans are intended to be dynamic. So we'll talk about them this month and next month, but as things come up throughout the year, of course, we can adjust that work plan accordingly. And they serve as an overall guide for the committee, as well as staff, associated advisory boards, and again, are updated throughout the course of the fiscal year. Next slide, please, Katie. So getting to your scope of work, the committee was assigned to review policy updates and make policy recommendations that ensure fairness and equity in the provision of city resources and livelihood needs of all community members and groups, and to ensure an equitable community that provides community members with the opportunity to be informed and engaged in the policymaking process. Next slide, Katie. So then some of the, along with the scope of work, key policy topic areas were identified back in November 2022, whenever there was that detailed assessment of the existing council committee structure. And I'm not going to name all of these, but just wanted to highlight a few that are directly aligned with some of the work that you heard about today, as well as some of the items that we'll be going through on the look back at FY 2024, as well as the draft work plan for FY 2025. So you'll see on there neighborhood matching grants, the community survey, engagement initiatives and engagement tools, which definitely is aligned with the previous presentation that you just heard, as well as supporting issues pertaining to persons with disabilities and reparations. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we try to make sure all of the work that comes through this committee is directly aligned with your strategic priorities and your goal statements, which again are a new element that was added with the FY 2024 budget development process. And so, of course, the work is directly aligned with your priority of reparations. And then you had a strategic priority goal of maximize collaboration with the Community Reparations Commission and partners to effectively implement short and long-term recommendations and grow reparations investment by increased funding and continue to look for more revenue sources and partners. So that is the one that has the most alignment, but of course, there is alignment with several other strategic priorities as well as strategic priority goals that you establish in FY 25. This is just the one that has the most direct alignment to the scope of work of this committee. Next slide, please, Katie. So an area that I will already acknowledge that we have made some strides in, but still have a long way to go, is we are wanting to have better connectivity with our advisory boards and council committees. And we really want to make sure that that's as two-way as possible, getting feedback from the work that's going on at the advisory committees, but then also providing some direction on where you might want to have some policy vetting and other research done by the advisory committees as they're setting forth their body of work for each fiscal year as well. So the advisory boards that have the most direct alignment to the scope of work of this committee are the Human Relations Commission, Neighborhood Advisory Committee, the African American Heritage Commission, the Community Reparations Commission, and then the Boards and Commissions Working Group, which is was I believe previously referenced by Dawa. Next slide. Okay, so now into celebrating some of our accomplishments. And one area where we did have some direct connectivity was you all recommended to council, who ultimately adopted a revision to the city's non-discrimination ordinance to include language protecting natural hairstyles. And that came out of a recommendation from the HRCA, which was then brought to this committee and then approved by full council. And we'd like to see more of that connectivity moving forward, giving the advisory boards the opportunity to work through policy considerations, make recommendations to this committee, and then ultimately this committee making recommendations to full council. So that's where, as we get more structured with our work planning efforts at the committee level, as well as with our advisory boards, we hope to see more of this, but that's just a really good example of where we're trying to go. We also saw some great enhancements with our strategic partnership grant program, thanks to feedback from you all over the course of FY24. In FY24, $643,209 was awarded to agencies through the strategic partnership grant program. And thanks to your feedback, we did reconstitute the evaluation committee and also updated our scoring criteria. And one of the key enhancements was that we had 2 Kayla youth participate on the evaluation panel to provide their experience and their insight on the service providers. Next, we had the disparity study report accepted, as well as the Asheville Business Inclusion Policy extended. And thanks to you all for the feedback that you provided, and also thank you to council for the extension of the policy. And now the body of work that's underway is the implementation plan. And you recently heard from Marcus Kirkman and Rachel Taylor an update on those efforts that we have in terms of implementation. The Equity Action Plan was adopted internally by our organization just prior to our former Equity and Inclusion Director Brenda Mills' retirement. And that is something that we are currently working on better integrating into our organizational work plan and making sure we're asking the right questions and using that equity lens as we look at how we deliver services across the community. Also, the Cease the Harm audit was completed, and this was a first of its kind audit that was a recommendation from the Community Reparations Commission. Both Brenda and Salah provided you with updates as they went through their monthly update on the Reparations Commission effort as a whole. And now, similar to what we're doing with the disparity study, we're working on an implementation plan. And over the course of FY 2025, you'll be hearing updates from staff on where we're focusing our energy and being able to respond to those recommendations that we got from the Carter Development Group. You've also seen updates from the CAPE team on our neighborhood matching grant program. 37 projects have been funded in 23 neighborhoods since the program was established in 2021. This included more than 2,500 volunteer hours and $164,110 being made available to neighborhoods across the community. The program is now accepting applications on a rolling basis and continues to be enhanced based on feedback from neighborhoods that have participated in the program. Next slide, please. A few additional highlights. You all heard an update recently from Dawa Hitch on the National Community Survey being completed. This was our 5th survey completed, and it monitored trends of resident opinions, measured governmental performance, and was used to inform our budget and programmatic priorities for this FY25 budget. You also heard progress on several ARPA-funded inclusive and accessible government projects, most recently just before this presentation. But the project also includes the graduation for the first 2 community engagement cohorts, which will occur in July 2024, with 12-month consultant support for those graduates. And then internal trainings and language accessibility assessment, which was conducted prior to the development of the FY 2025 budget. This also included council and committee meeting agendas being made available in Spanish. And thank you to the CAPE team for leading that effort. And then, as you heard earlier, ongoing progress is made with the Community Reparations Commission. They're at a really exciting point where they have, I believe, adopted all of their recommendations, and they are now finalizing the report. And you will be hearing from the Reparations Commission, as Salah mentioned, in July, on what specifically they're looking to do with the extension request. So again, we don't do a whole lot of looking back at the achievements that have been made, and by no means do we want to say mission accomplished. There's still a lot of important work that needs to be done, but also just wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the achievements that have occurred over the course of the last fiscal year, thanks to your leadership, the great work of staff, as well as the engagement of our advisory board members and the community as a whole. So if y'all don't have comments on what we've done over the course of the last year, we can then pivot into getting some general feedback from you on what we're looking at for potential topics on our FY 2025 committee work plan. Okay, next slide, please, Katie. So one thing that you'll hear a lot of, and I already alluded to this a little bit, is implement. We had a lot of really important planning efforts that occurred throughout the course of FY 24. I've named a few, including the disparity study, the Cease the Harm audit. We know that the Reparations Commission has voted on their recommendations. Those recommendations will be presented to you hopefully this fall. We'll get feedback from council and direction from council on that implementation, but a large body of work will be involved in the implementation of those council authorized recommendations as we seek to respond to the direction you provide, as well as the Reparations Commission's vote. So with that in mind, a few things that we are looking at covering for you this next fiscal year include accessibility during the budget development process. As I previously mentioned, improved connectivity with those advisory boards, just wanting to have more opportunities to seek feedback on specific topics from advisory boards. Implementation of the Cease the Harm audit, implementation of the organization's equity action plan, implementation of the reparations recommendations, implementation of the disparity study, additional refinements, and then of course, program awards for the Strategic Partnership Grant Program, the Boards and Commissions Accommodation Project, and that's really focused on making sure that we're removing additional barriers for participation, both for public comment as well as for advisory board participation to boards and commissions. And things that have been considered include things like stipends, bus passes, and also just having consistency on the types of accommodations that are provided to advisory board members from board and committee to across the organization. Also looking at our climate resilience resource guide update, and we actually have an update slated for July 2024 on that, where you'll be hearing from Bridget Herring. Website accessibility improvements, additional updates on neighborhood matching grant, and then online public engagement enhancements. So a lot of these items were identified because they're items that we already have on departmental work plans, and several of these, including the disparity study, reparations, equity action plan, and Cease the Harm audit, we know are going to be included on our organizational work plan for FY 25 as well. Next slide, please. So next steps, as I mentioned, this is part one of our FY 25 committee work plan development. We will have a follow-up discussion based on the feedback that we received from you today at your August meeting, where we hope to get additional details from you on the equity and engagement work plan. In September, staff will provide updates to impacted advisory boards if you all do have specific items that you want to assign to advisory boards for them to review throughout the course of the fiscal year. And then as needed, we'll have those report backs from the advisory board as well as from staff. And then we'll have a planned agenda items that, if you look at the agenda every month, at the very bottom of the agenda, we list future agenda items. And you're also always welcome to provide us with feedback on if there are things that you thought you were going to hear about, things that you think are missing, or things that you think are really timely. We can, of course, adjust the agenda based on the feedback of the committee. And then annually, just to improve that connectivity with the advisory boards, we do schedule annual report updates from advisory board members. Typically, the chair will come present to you on what they've done over the course of the last year and also give you a snapshot on some of the things that they're wanting to focus on for the upcoming fiscal year. So we do plan to continue that effort in FY 2025. But Katie, if you'll actually go to the previous slide, would like to get feedback from this committee on items that you think might be missing and just talk through work plan development with you for FY 2025. I see Councilmember Roney has raised her hand.
Thank you for this presentation, Rachel. I'm inclined, instead of adding to the list, to actually help weave some of them together. And so being the liaison to both Neighborhood Advisory Committee and the HRCA, I know that there's a sort of like a meeting of the minds coming together for the planning and urban design committees. Both the HRCA and the NAC meet every other month. So I wondered if it might be a good use of time and energy for us to invite them to meet together, maybe later this year. But first, it would help, I think, if instead of waiting for our advisory boards to come up with ideas to inform our work and recommendations to us, if we reach out more. And I think I hear that happening in this conversation. Two areas I'm thinking of are, one, the housing subcommittee of the HRCA is looking to get in the weeds a little bit and make some recommendations. They did make one recommendation around source of income, discrimination protection, but also maybe proactively engaging our neighborhood advisory commission, because they have those relationships across the city around our equity goals and how that matches up with some of the zoning changes that are coming up. So instead of waiting for neighborhood advisory committee to seek making a recommendation on zoning changes, proactively engaging them in advance. But it just seemed to me like some of that mapping and outreach, we should be really intentional with that. And the second thing I was thinking of was neighborhood grants. So we did so much work with the Climate Justice Initiative to get feedback from our legacy neighborhoods, and they engaged, which is excellent. I wonder if we might provide more of a guiding light with our neighborhood grants to align our goals so that we get the kind of investment that we had hoped to provide by making more authentic invitations. And I wonder if it's because they're running parallel, the neighborhood grants and the Climate Justice Initiative that has the vulnerability index, if we might be able to provide a better guiding light for helping them knit together. But I would be interested to hear what my other colleagues here think about that.
And I'll just add, in the spirit of knitting together, you've kind of picked up on an important theme, Councilmember Roney, and that is particularly for the disparity study, for the Cease the Harm audit, for the reparations recommendations, there's going to be a ton of overlap between those. And so that's a lot of work that's happening behind the scenes right now with staff, is identifying how do we coordinate those efforts? How do we improve reporting on the implementation of those efforts so that it's clear when we're working on something that what we're working on is directly aligned with several really important high impact priority areas, and that we are focused on implementing these important plans or these important audits that have just been completed. So that's something that I wish I could tell you specifically what that's going to look like, but we've got a lot of brainstorming sessions that are happening behind the scenes. And I see an extension of that being better reporting the items that are assigned from committees. And what you described, Councilmember Roney, really is ideal. We do want to have that bi-directional communication with the advisory boards, but the preference would be you all are setting the vision for the upcoming fiscal year. You're providing specific assignments to those advisory boards. The advisory boards are then doing the work, reporting back to you that then informs policy decisions that are made by the full city council. So we're wanting to head in that direction, and any feedback you all have on how you'd like to see that information, particularly as we're working on items that touch on multiple high priority areas, we welcome that, just because we want to make sure we're hitting the mark on that and that you're clear on why we're working on what we're working on from a staff level.
So you bring up a good point is with the reparations work, the thing that I'm imagining we probably want to invite a gap to be filled is that the chair of the Neighborhood Advisory Committee most recently was Babette Mays. And so she would sort of like automatically liaison the information that was happening at the Reparations Commission to the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. But we don't have her there anymore. So it might be helpful to invite some of the Reparations Commission members to openings at future Neighborhood Advisory Committee openings. And also when Bridget comes to talk about the climate resilience resource, maybe we can talk more about knitting that and the neighborhood matching grant together. Because those are some areas I imagine we could amplify work instead of making new work.
Sage.
Thank you. Thanks for putting together this presentation and long list. I mean, this is some big items. So my initial feedback is let's pare it down. And I'd be curious, in sync with the rest of this conversation, how that might look and if staff want to try and tackle some of that, because it sounds like you have some ideas. I also want to echo, I love the idea of the work plan and the committees, because this is, Shanika and I are in the housing committee and we did this with AHAC. It was kind of the pilot and it worked really well because AHAC at the time was feeling like it had lots of great resources, information, and just stuff to share, but didn't have the mechanism to share it with us. And then we were seeking particular feedback, but we weren't relating to them as well to get it. So we flushed that out, and I really think it turned out well for both parties. And so I support that here as well. Lastly, I want to make sure that the Strategic Partnership Grant Program is lifted pretty high in the priorities for this year, just because it's been something this committee has been talking about for a couple cycles now, and we haven't really taken that leap. So just maybe my personal input is to rise that one up the list as you build it. But my first steps would be to hear from y'all on what is a reasonable amount of work to take on in a singular work plan? How might it flush out into subsequent years, because these are big things. It's not discussing or doing studies and getting input, it's implementation. And for me to really weigh in on what we should bite off at and which order, I need to understand the longer impact, if that makes sense.
And Councilmember Turner, if I could, thank you for bringing that up. And part of the reason that I noted we're going to come back in August is because there's a lot of work, as I previously mentioned, happening behind the scenes with staff on tightening up and finalizing what our organizational work plan for FY25 is going to look like. And implementation really is going to be the theme internally of our organizational work plan. And to the point you just raised, Councilmember Turner, where we've got to focus is, there were over 100 recommendations from the Cease the Harm audit. We would love to be able to implement them all tomorrow, but realistically, just based on staff capacity, resources, we're going to have to tighten that list and look at what are the highest impact areas that we can get done over the course of the next fiscal year, at least get started over the course of the next fiscal year. So by August, what I hope to be able to do is come back to you, and for these items that are really implementation focused items, say what specifically staff is going to be focusing on within those implementation plans over the course of the next fiscal year, to give you all a better idea of where staff is really thinking that we could have the biggest impact based on existing resources and other work that's currently underway. And then that might help inform assignments to advisory boards, and ultimately where we land with the work plan for FY25 for this committee.
Kim.
I agree that the strategic partnership funds has been a focus of this committee, and we have some outstanding recommendations about funding. I'm also keeping in mind when I've attended the Reparations Commission meetings with the Cease the Harm audit, there was some, if I remember this right, some question about the metrics and the outcomes and the data around the strategic partnership funds and how they're being used. So I wonder if that's another opportunity to knit two work plan items together so that we could look at what are the kind of recommendations. Are there ways that we could respond to the Reparations Commission's recommendations using our strategic partnership funds to kind of guide them to get them to better data, better outcomes, meeting our goals. But it does seem like there's room for, like I said, more combining and then less scattering energy.
Yes, and that's a great example of an item where for Cease the Harm and the overlap with strategic partnership grants in particular, we've had conversations already internally with Salam and Ayamira, Rachel Taylor, as well as our new internal audit team that we've established. And I was recently named to the United for Youth. I should say I know what this is. I believe it's a board that we're going to be on, but it is a more holistic community focus. It's being led by the United Way on how do we address the opportunity gap and how do we measure performance. So I think there's a lot of synergy happening in that space. But to your point, Councilmember Roney, yes, we're looking at the overlap for Cease the Harm audit, recommendations coming out of the Reparations Commission, as well as the experience that we've gotten feedback from our strategic partnership grant recipients, but wanting to make sure that we are much more data driven so that if we add resources to the program, we can really talk about the impact that those resources are having.
Then I guess the last thing that I have but outstanding would be whether or not there's interest in keeping neighborhood matching grant a separate project or starting to align it more closely with our climate justice initiative and our vulnerability index. And maybe that could be part of our conversation when Bridget comes to this group.
And it looks like Bridget's presentation that she currently has planned is an update on the Climate Resilience Resource Guide. So I will be honest and say I haven't been briefed on that to know exactly what the specifics of the resource guide are, but I think based on today's conversation, I can certainly ask Bridget and Dawa to touch base and come back in August whenever we have our discussion on our next discussion on the work plan on what makes the most sense in terms of enhancing the linkages between the neighborhood matching grant program and climate resilience.
Thank you.
All right, we'll continue the discussion on August 20th, did you say?
Yes, we don't currently, aside from, and we could push this to July, aside from the item that we mentioned Bridget wanting to make an update on, we were going to ask if you all would be open to us maybe using the month of July for work planning purposes and then reconvening this committee in August, just so that we can be a little bit more prepared for that work plan conversation as we're working to identify the alignment between several of these items and give you more specifics around what our implementation strategies will be.
That sounds fine.
Great.
All right, thank you, Rachel. A lot of great things happening. I think we're at the end of our meeting, but before we close out, we want to take public comment.
Yes, let me see if we have anybody in the queue. One moment. No, we do not.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're counting down to Juneteenth and my birthday. So we'll see you all later.
Happy birthday.
Birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.